Hey, what's going on? In this Friday's video, we're going to talk all about varnishing. I'm going to talk about why varnishing is important, when you should varnish, and also some varnishing techniques. And if you watch to the very end, I have two really helpful tips that nobody tells you about varnishing, and I think it'll save you a lot of time. So stick around and let's get into it. Hey, what's going on? I'm Brian McCormick, and this is Gallery Bry, where every Friday you can learn all about oil painting techniques, materials, and even art marketing. So if you want to improve your painting, and if you want to grow your art business, make that commitment to yourself right now by hitting the subscribe button and that notification bell so that you don't miss the videos that come out every Friday. And if you're new here, make sure you comment new down in the comments so that I can welcome you personally. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So you might be asking yourself, why should I varnish my paintings? Well, there's two really good reasons why you should varnish your paintings. The first one is that it's going to protect your painting from the environment. There's a very good chance that your painting is going to outlive you, and you're going to want to give it some protection so that it's going to look beautiful for years into the future. The second reason is that varnish can even out the reflective properties of your painting. Some pigments are going to dry very matte, and some pigments are going to dry very glossy, and you want to balance that out with the varnish. You can either have a very glossy varnish, you can have a dull matte varnish, or you can have something in between known as a satin varnish. It's really up to you depending on your painting style to figure out which one you like best. I use the glossy varnish from Gamvar because it just works well for my painting style. Other people don't like that, maybe you won't, and maybe you would like the matte varnish as well. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the proper way to varnish a painting. Okay, so before we go ahead and get started here, a common question that people often have is, when should I varnish my painting? Now, in the past, people usually waited 6 months or more to varnish paintings because they were using brittle Damar varnishes. And today, manufacturers like Gamblin will say that you can varnish your painting when it's touch dry, which this painting is, and when the thickest part of the paint is firm. Now this one isn't very thick, there's not a lot of impasto here, but the way that you can check that is by using your fingernail and just gently pressing it on what you think is the thickest layer of paint. If it leaves an indentation, then it's too early to varnish that painting because the paint underneath hasn't cured and hardened. So this one, it's not leaving any marks and it's touch dry. So I'm gonna go ahead and varnish this one. So I'm just using a little bit of glossy Gamvar varnish. And typically what I do is I will just take my brush and I'll try and get most of the varnish out first so that there's not too much on it. One of the things that you'll see a lot are videos of people they'll take the varnish and they'll pour it onto the painting and then start brushing it out to the corners. It looks really good and it makes for great videos, but for me, I find that I just can't get a really even coverage that way. There will be too much in the middle and not enough on the outside. And by doing it this way, I find that I can really control how much varnish I'm getting on the painting. And you really don't need a lot. You just need a very, very thin coat to be able to even out the reflective properties. So typically, what I'll do is I'll start brushing it on, and I like to hold it at an angle, or I like to look at it at an angle so that I can see the varnish going on. And you can also look directly over top and you can see it that way too. It just depends on, what works best for you. And so right now I can see that it's going on very evenly. And now here's a little trick and tip for you. Instead of brushing it on vertically like this, use the entire brush. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll lie the brush very flat, and you really get a very even coverage that way because you're getting more surface area of the brush on your painting, and you'll cover a painting much faster that way. And so I'll typically do that to get a lot of coverage. And then what I'll do is I'll go over it more of a sharper angle with the brush to get out any bubbles or any imperfections in the varnish. Now, what you really want to do is make sure that you inspect the painting very, very closely, because there are so many things that can get into the layer of varnish. There can be hairs, there can be dust, there can be just little bits of dirt. Even if you're being very, very clean in your studio, it just happens. Dust gets around, and you just want to really check and make sure that you don't have any of that in your varnish. Obviously, you could use a mineral spirit to take the varnish off and redo it, but it just adds more time and it's just more of a headache. And if you see something, you can just lift it out with your brush, put that aside, and then you can continue to, level that out. Now, another thing that I have found is that me personally, I like to dry my varnish on my painting lying flat. I found that if you dry it at an angle, that sometimes the varnish will tend to run down. Not that there's so much on there that it's gonna run, but gravity will just bring more varnish down to the lower end of the painting. So it may not be readily visible. You may not see drip marks, but just the gravity itself will bring more varnish down into this end as opposed to up on this end, even if you have a very thin layer. So what I do is I put it on a drying rack and I make sure that there's something covering the top of it so that no dust and other particles can get down into the varnish while it's drying. So that's a technique that I use for varnishing my paintings, and I think that it'll work very well for you. All right, now that we've talked about varnishing benefits and techniques, I want to give you 2 tips that can save you a lot of time when it comes to varnishing your paintings. The first one is you don't have to wash your varnish brush every single time. You can let the varnish dry on the brush and it's not going to ruin the brush. Now it depends on which varnish you use. Some varnishes you can't reactivate with a solvent. I use Gamblin's Gamvar and it has solvent in there so that you can take it off of your painting. And this is what enables you to leave it in your brush, because all you have to do is put it in your varnish jar and that solvent will soften up the varnish in the bristles and you'll be able to go ahead and start varnishing your paintings from there. The other one is you want to batch your varnishing if possible. So what I mean by batching is to make an assembly line so that you can just varnish all your paintings all at once if you can. So it'll save you a ton of time. It seems like a very common sense tip, but sometimes we just get busy in life and we just do things haphazardly. But if we can have a system and if we can do things systematically, it saves us a ton of time in the long run. So hopefully these are 2 helpful tips for you. Okay, hopefully that was a helpful video for you. If it was, please return the favor by giving this video a thumbs up and comment helpful down in the comments. Every time you leave a like and a comment, it makes this video more visible to other people who want to learn how to paint. And don't forget to hit this subscribe button right here so you don't miss the videos that come out every Friday. So with that, I hope you guys are doing well and we'll see you next Friday.